Every government on Earth is borrowing money it can never repay. This is not a secret. It is not a prediction. It is the explicit design of the system. If the United States paid off its national debt tomorrow, there would be a global depression within hours. If every nation balanced its books, money itself would begin to vanish. Debt is not a problem the system is trying to solve. Debt is the fuel the system runs on, and we are running out of road. $315 trillion. That is the current total of global debt, public and private combined. It is a number so large it becomes meaningless, so let us make it meaningful. If you stacked $1 bills from here to the sun, you would run out of bills before you reached Mercury. If you divided this debt equally among every human being alive, every infant, every farmer, every refugee, every billionaire, each person would owe roughly $40,000. To whom? That is the question no one can answer clearly. We owe it to banks who borrowed it from central banks who created it from nothing. We owe it to pension funds who owe it to retirees who are promised a future that may not exist. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to ghosts. We owe it to the abstract machinery of a financial system that requires ever more debt to avoid collapse. This is not how a healthy economy operates. This is how a Ponzi scheme operates. And the only difference between a Ponzi scheme and modern sovereign finance is that the modern version has a printing press. The origin of this particular madness has a date. It was September 2008. For decades, banks had been building a tower of leveraged bets, slicing up mortgages into exotic instruments, insuring bets with more bets, and pretending the whole architecture was stable because everyone agreed to pretend. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, the pretending stopped. For a few terrifying weeks, the global financial system stared into the void. Banks would not lend to each other. Credit froze. The machinery of daily commerce began to seize, and so governments did what governments always do when the alternative is chaos. They intervened, they borrowed, they guaranteed, they printed. The United States alone pumped trillions into the banking system. Europe did the same, China did the same, and the fire was extinguished, the banks were saved. And almost no one noticed the profound shift that had just occurred. The debt did not disappear, it migrated. It moved from the balance sheets of private banks onto the balance sheets of nations. Governments became the new debtors of last resort, and unlike banks, governments cannot go bankrupt. They can only inflate, default, or collapse. Here is how the mechanism works. Imagine you owe someone $100 due next month. You do not have $100, so you borrow $110 from someone else. You pay the first debt and now owe the second. When that debt comes due, you borrow $120, then $130. At no point do you pay anything back. You simply roll the debt forward, always owing a little more than before. This is not a sustainable household budget. This is modern sovereign finance. Governments issue bonds. Investors buy those bonds expecting to be repaid with interest. When the bonds mature, governments do not pay them off with tax revenue. They pay them off by issuing new bonds. The debt never shrinks. It rolls. It compounds. The only question is whether new investors will keep showing up to buy the new bonds at rates the government can afford. For decades they did. Interest rates fell. Demand for government debt soared. Central banks became buyers of last resort, purchasing their own government's debt with newly created money. This is not a metaphor. This is literally what quantitative easing means. A government borrows money by selling bonds. Its own central bank buys those bonds with money that did not exist until the moment of purchase. The government spends the money. The central bank holds the bond, and the debt becomes a fiction written on both sides of the same ledger. In any other context, this would be called fraud. In macroeconomics, it is called monetary policy. The same logic now operates at planetary scale. Japan owes more than 260% of its annual economic output. The United States owes more than 120%. European nations vary, but almost none are trending towards solvency. Emerging markets, desperate for capital, have borrowed heavily in dollars they cannot print. The script is the same everywhere. Borrow to stimulate, borrow to stabilize, borrow to service the borrowing, repeat. And because everyone is doing it, no one looks insolvent by comparison. A drunk does not look drunk in a room full of drunks, but the hangover is coming. The beneficiaries of this arrangement are not evenly distributed. When central banks flood the system with liquidity, that money does not arrive everywhere at once. It enters through financial institutions. It inflates asset prices first. Stocks rise. Real estate rises. Those who already own assets become wealthier. Those who do not own assets find themselves priced out of markets that grow faster than their wages. This is not conspiracy. It is arithmetic. Money flows uphill before it trickles down, and sometimes it never trickles at all. Politicians benefit because they can spend without taxing, passing the invoice to future administrations. Bankers benefit because cheap money is their oxygen. The young, the poor, the savers, the workers without portfolios, they pay through the slow erosion of purchasing power. They pay through housing costs that outpace salaries. They pay through a retirement age that keeps receding. They pay without receiving a bill, which is the most insidious form of taxation. Inflation is a tax that requires no vote. What happens when the game ends? This is the question everyone avoids because there is no good answer. The system rests on confidence. Investors buy government debt because they trust they will be repaid, either in money that holds value or through stable refinancing. If that confidence cracks, the feedback is nonlinear. Interest rates spike. The cost of servicing debt rises. Governments must borrow more just to pay interest on what they already owe. This is the doom loop. It happened to Greece. It happened to Argentina. It happened to Lebanon. It is happening to smaller nations right now, invisible to Western headlines. The difference is scale. In 2008, governments could rescue banks because governments still had credibility to borrow. But there is no one left to rescue the governments. The International Monetary Fund can stabilize a small economy. It cannot stabilize the United States, the Eurozone, Japan, and China simultaneously. There is no lender of last resort for the lender of last resort. When the sovereign defaults, the cascade begins. Banks holding government bonds become insolvent, pension funds collapse, currencies become unstable, and the social contract, that invisible agreement by which people accept paper money for their labor, begins to dissolve. We have seen this before. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. The pattern is always the same. First the money dies, then the trust dies, then everything else follows. No one can predict when. Timing is the one thing markets never reveal in advance. But the mathematics are not debatable. A debt that grows faster than the economy that services it will eventually outpace any ability to repay or refinance. Every Ponzi scheme looks stable until the moment it is not. The final investor who buys in, the last one holding the asset, discovers there is no one left to sell to. The difference with sovereign debt is that the final investors are not hedge funds or speculators. They're pension funds, they're central banks, they're ordinary citizens who trusted that the system was sound. When the music stops, there will be no chairs for them. Debt is not evil. Debt is a claim on future labor, a promise that tomorrow will be productive enough to pay for today. For centuries that promise held. Economies grew, populations expanded, innovation created wealth that did not exist before, but growth has slowed. Populations are aging, the great tailwinds of the industrial era are fading, and still the debts compound. What we are witnessing is not a crisis yet. It is the long, slow process of a system consuming its own foundation. The question is not whether it will fall. The question is whether anything can be built in its place before it does. $315 trillion, an abstraction written in ledgers stored on servers, believed into existence by collective faith. One day, historians will look back and try to explain how an entire civilization mortgaged its future to preserve its present. They will ask why no one stopped it. The answer will be simple. Everyone was waiting for someone else to go first.